The words echoed in the sterile, glass-walled conference room, each one a tiny, sharp shard of ice piercing the bubble of professional security I had carefully constructed over 25 years. Nobody wants Grandma's designs anymore. Kenneth said it with a smug chuckle, a sound that was all teeth and no warmth. His voice, usually a smooth baritone reserved for charming clients and intimidating subordinates, was laced with a casual cruelty that made the air feel thin. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, a king surveying his court, his expensive watch catching the late afternoon sun that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Bright Hollow Labs downtown Phoenix office. The light cast long, dramatic shadows across the polished mahogany table, shadows that felt like they were creeping over my career, my life's work, dissecting it like a failed blueprint. "We need fresh blood on the innovation team, Eliza," he continued, his eyes sweeping over the other partners, all younger men he had brought in, all nodding in silent, sycophantic agreement. Not outdated concepts from the 80s. I sat there, my hands folded primly in my lap, my posture ramrod straight, a habit drilled into me by decades of client presentations and board meetings. Inside, however, I was crumbling. 25 years of dedication, of pouring my heart and soul into this firm, was turning to dust in front of my colleagues. My breath was a tight knot in my chest. I could feel the sting of unshed tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Kenneth the satisfaction. "My name is Eliza Freeman. I am 56 years old, and I have been designing sustainable architecture since before it was a trendy buzzword, since before LEED certification was a gold standard people chased for PR points. I had been a pioneer. For over 2 decades, I'd poured my heart into this firm, Bright Hollow Labs, a company founded on the very principles I championed. I had created innovative green buildings that balanced functionality with environmental responsibility, structures that breathed with their surroundings rather than imposing upon them. I had won awards, prestigious ones that now gathered dust in a display case in the lobby. I had mentored young architects, many of whom now sat around this very table, their faces a carefully curated mixture of false sympathy and palpable relief that they weren't the one in the hot seat. I had helped establish Bright Hollow Labs as a leader in sustainable design, a beacon in the arid landscape of the Southwest. But today, none of that seemed to matter. My legacy was being erased with a few condescending sentences. "Your aesthetic has become," Kenneth paused, making a show of searching for the right, diplomatic word while adjusting the cuff of his ridiculously expensive watch. He was a man who performed his power, every gesture a calculated display. "Dated," he finally landed on, the word a final, blunt blow. "The market wants sleek, modern designs that speak to younger demographics. Your work feels too traditional, Eliza. Too rooted in the past." The other partners nodded again, their heads moving in perfect, rehearsed unison. I could see it in their eyes, they'd already made up their minds before I'd even walked into the room. This wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. An execution. I looked at each of them in turn. There was Mark, whose first major project I had personally guided him through, saving it from a catastrophic design flaw. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on a meaningless chart on the wall. There was David, who I had recommended for partnership, seeing a spark in him that others had missed. He was fiddling with his pen, a nervous tic I knew well. They were cowards, all of them, sacrificing loyalty for their own security under Kenneth's new regime. The firm had been my life. It was founded by my mentor, the brilliant Patricia Holloway. Patricia was a visionary who believed that buildings should exist in harmony with the earth. She saw architecture not just as a business, but as a responsibility. She taught me everything I knew, not just about thermal mass and passive solar design, but about integrity. She had been the soul of Bright Hollow Labs. But Patricia had retired 5 years ago, selling her shares to the current partnership. And with her departure, the soul of the company had begun to wither. Kenneth Morrison, with his slick suits and focus on profits over principles, had been climbing the corporate ladder ever since. He favored flashy, ostentatious designs that looked good in architectural magazines but often sacrificed long-term sustainability for immediate visual impact. His idea of innovation was installing the latest smart home gimmick in otherwise conventional, energy-guzzling buildings and calling them revolutionary. We had clashed, quietly at first, then more openly, over the direction of the firm. I had become a relic of a bygone era, a ghost of Patricia's conscience haunting the hallways. Kenneth slid a sleek, black folder across the table toward me. The polished surface was so perfect it was like a dark mirror, reflecting a distorted, elongated version of my own strained face. Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning off the innovation team. I didn't flinch. I reached out with a steady hand and drew the folder towards me. My fingers felt numb. We're restructuring to focus on more contemporary approaches to sustainable design, he said, the word contemporary dripping with condescension. You'll be reassigned to our restoration division, working on historical preservation projects. The irony was a bitter pill in the back of my throat. It wasn't just a demotion, it was a carefully crafted insult. They were relegating me to fixing old buildings, literally putting me in the past, while dismissing the very experience that had taught me how to create lasting, beautiful, and truly innovative structures. It was a message, loud and clear: you belong with the ruins. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent in my office, perfecting designs, long after everyone else had gone home. I remembered the client meetings where I'd fought passionately for sustainable materials back when they were expensive and unpopular, convincing them of the long-term value. I thought of all the young architects I'd trained, the ones who were now sitting silently around this table, complicit in my professional execution. A wave of heat washed over me, a potent mix of anger and humiliation. But I pushed it down, burying it deep. I opened the folder. Inside were the formal papers, my new title, my new, significantly smaller office location, my new, significantly less impactful responsibilities. I understand, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I met Kenneth's gaze, holding it, refusing to be the one to look away first. A flicker of something, annoyance? Surprise, crossed his face before he masked it with his usual polished indifference. When does this transition take effect? I asked, my tone as cool and professional as if we were discussing a project timeline. Next Monday, Kenneth replied, already shuffling through other papers, my dismissal already a completed item on his agenda. Harrison will take over your current projects. We'll make sure the clients are informed of the change. Harrison. A talented, ambitious kid, barely 30. I had been mentoring him myself. The betrayal cut a little deeper. As I stood up, gathered my things, and walked toward the door, my heels clicking a lonely rhythm on the marble floor, I caught a glimpse of my latest project sketches still pinned to the presentation board on the far wall. They were designs for an innovative, eco-friendly housing complex that combined advanced solar technology with ancient, passive natural ventilation systems. Designs that were both beautiful and profoundly functional. A project I had poured my heart into, believing it could redefine affordable housing in the desert. Little did Kenneth know, those dated concepts, that Grandma's design, were about to prove him very, very wrong. Walking back to my office, I tried to process what had just happened. The hallways of Bright Hollow Labs, a place I had navigated for so long I could do it with my eyes closed, suddenly felt different, alien. It was no longer a second home, it was a place where I was merely tolerated, a relic being moved into storage. I had joined the firm straight out of graduate school, back when sustainable architecture was considered a niche specialty rather than an industry standard. This place was my professional identity. My daughter, Claire, had been telling me for years to leave. She lived in Seattle with her husband and my 2 beautiful grandchildren, and during our weekly video calls, she'd often ask why I stayed at a firm that seemed to undervalue my contributions. Mom, you could start your own practice, she'd say, her face earnest on my laptop screen. You have the experience and the reputation. People would flock to you. But I had always resisted. My loyalty to Patricia, to the firm she built, was deeply ingrained. Bright Hollow Labs had been my professional identity for so long that I couldn't imagine working anywhere else. But now, they had made the decision for me. As I reached my office, I noticed the photos on my desk. Images of buildings I'd designed over the years. There was the community center in Tucson, with its rammed earth walls and rainwater harvesting system, that had won a state sustainability award. The elementary school in Tempe, which used strategic shading and solar chimneys to reduce its energy consumption by 60%, a project that had become a case study for school districts nationwide. The affordable housing project in Mesa that had become a model for other cities. Each project represented not just a building, but a piece of my professional soul. My computer chimed with an email notification. My heart gave a little lurch. For a moment, I wondered if it was Kenneth, sending a follow-up with more humiliating details of my new role. But the subject line was different. It was from the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative, marked with high importance. My breath caught. 3 months ago, I had seen that the city had announced a competition for sustainable, affordable housing concepts. It was a massive, city-defining project. Frustrated with the direction of the firm and needing a creative outlet that was truly my own, I decided to enter. Working on it during late evenings and weekends in my home studio, I had poured every ounce of my 25 years of experience into it. It was the culmination of everything I believed in. It was my modular housing concept, the very one pinned to the board in the conference room. I had submitted it under my own name, Eliza Freeman, architect, rather than through the firm. It was a small act of rebellion, a secret I kept for myself. The email was brief but promising. They wanted to schedule a presentation meeting for the following week. I was a finalist. My heart began to race as I realized the beautiful, stunning irony of the situation. While Kenneth was pushing me toward the exit, my own work, the work he had just deemed obsolete, might be opening an entirely different, and far grander, door. I quickly responded, confirming my availability. Then I leaned back in my chair, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time all day. The weekend passed in a blur of mixed emotions. I found myself oscillating between a simmering anger at Kenneth's dismissive treatment and a thrilling, nervous excitement about the upcoming presentation with the city. On Saturday morning, I spread my competition designs across my dining room table, reviewing every detail with fresh eyes. My concept centered around modular, sustainable housing units that could be adapted to different family sizes and lot configurations. It was a design born of deep knowledge of the desert environment. It incorporated passive solar heating, advanced rainwater collection systems, and rooftop gardens that residents could use for growing food. The aesthetic was clean and modern, but it was grounded in a practical functionality that was timeless. It was, in essence, what Kenneth would probably call grandma's designs, but what I knew was simply good, thoughtful, enduring architecture. On Sunday afternoon, Claire called for our weekly check-in. "You sound different, Mom," she said after I'd told her about being removed from the innovation team. "Happier. I was expecting you to be more upset." "Oh, I am upset," I admitted, pacing around my home office, the phone pressed to my ear. "But I'm also feeling something I haven't felt in years, honey. Freedom." Freedom? For the first time, I'm working on something that's entirely mine. Tell me about this city project. And so I did. I explained my housing design concept, how it could provide affordable, sustainable homes while creating a sense of community through shared green spaces and energy systems. As I spoke, I realized how passionate I still felt about my work, despite the firm's attempt to make me feel obsolete. "Mom, this sounds incredible," Claire said, her voice filled with excitement. "When is your presentation?" "Tuesday afternoon. I've been refining the proposal all weekend." I paused, looking at the drawings spread across my desk. "The funny thing is, Claire, this design incorporates everything I've learned over 25 years. It's not dated. It's evolved." Monday morning arrived with an email from Harrison, the young architect who would be taking over my projects. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the transition. I agreed, though I found it ironic that someone half my age with a fraction of my experience was considered more innovative simply because he preferred glass and steel over natural, time-tested materials. The meeting was professional but awkward. Harrison clearly felt uncomfortable about the situation, and I didn't want to make it harder for him. He was talented, just inexperienced, and none of this was his fault. "I've reviewed your current projects," he said, spreading files across the conference table, the same table where I'd been demoted just days before. "Your work is really impressive. I hope I can maintain the same level of quality." "You will," I assured him. "Just remember that sustainable design isn't about following trends. It's about creating buildings that will serve people well for decades." As I handed over my project files, I felt a strange sense of closure. These buildings would be completed by someone else, but they represented my past. Tuesday's presentation would determine my future. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early to finish clearing out my workspace from the innovation team area. The building felt quieter than usual, with most staff not arriving until 8 a.m. I'd always been an early riser, preferring the peaceful hours before the day's chaos began. Kenneth walked by my former desk as I was packing the last of my personal items into a cardboard box. "How's the transition going, Eliza?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was asking out of obligation rather than genuine concern. "Smoothly," I replied, not looking up from the box I was filling. "I'll be completely moved to the restoration department by this afternoon." "Good, good," he said, then paused. "I hope you understand that this decision wasn't personal. It's just business. The firm needs to stay competitive." I finally looked up at him, this man who'd spent the last 5 years systematically undermining everything Patricia Holloway had built. "I understand completely, Kenneth," I said, my voice even. "Sometimes change is exactly what's needed." He seemed satisfied with my response, gave a curt nod, and continued toward his corner office. What he didn't know was that in 3 hours, I'd be presenting to the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative Committee, potentially launching a new chapter of my career that would make his definition of competitive look extremely narrow. At 1 p.m., I left the office for my presentation, telling my assistant I had a dentist appointment. The Phoenix City Hall was a 15-minute drive from Bright Hollow Labs, and I used the time to review my talking points one final time. My hands were steadier than I'd expected. Apparently, years of high-stakes client presentations had prepared me for this moment. The committee meeting room was smaller than I'd anticipated, with 5 members seated around a rectangular table. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the city's Director of Sustainable Development, led the introductions. The other members included a city planner, a housing advocate, an environmental engineer, and a community representative. They were a serious, thoughtful group. "Miss Freeman," Dr. Rodriguez began, "we've reviewed your preliminary submission, and we're quite impressed. Your modular approach to sustainable housing addresses several key challenges we're facing in Phoenix. Could you walk us through your concept in more detail?" For the next 30 minutes, I presented my design with a passion and clarity I hadn't felt in years. I explained how the modular units could be manufactured off-site to reduce construction waste, how the passive solar design would minimize energy costs for residents, and how the integrated community gardens would provide both food security and social connection. "The beauty of this system," I said, pointing to my technical drawings, "is its adaptability. A young couple might start with a 1-bedroom unit, then add modules as their family grows. Empty nesters could downsize by removing sections, which could then be used for other families." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, each one allowing me to demonstrate the depth of thought I'd put into every aspect of the design. These weren't just pretty drawings, this was a comprehensive solution to urban housing challenges. "Miss Freeman," Dr. Rodriguez said as the session concluded, "we have 3 more presentations this week, but I can tell you that your proposal addresses our requirements exceptionally well. We'll be making our final decision by Friday and announcing the winner next Monday." As I drove back to Bright Hollow Labs, I felt a mixture of hope and nervous energy. Whether or not I won the competition, I'd reminded myself that my designs weren't dated. They were timeless, practical, and innovative in ways that mattered beyond aesthetic trends. The rest of the week crawled by at an agonizing pace. I threw myself into my new role in the restoration department, reviewing historical preservation guidelines and studying architectural drawings from the 1920s and 1930s. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Kenneth dismissed my work as dated, I was now officially responsible for maintaining buildings from nearly a century ago. Thursday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Harrison knocked on my new office door, looking uncertain. "Eliza, do you have a minute? I'm running into some issues with the Scottsdale project." I gestured for him to sit down. The Scottsdale project had been my baby, a mixed-use development that combined residential units with retail space and office areas, all designed around a central courtyard with native desert landscaping. "The client is asking for modifications to the ventilation system," Harrison continued. "They want to add more mechanical cooling, but I'm not sure how that affects your sustainability calculations." I pulled out my original notes for the project. The natural ventilation system was designed to work with the building's orientation and the thermal mass of the adobe walls, I explained. "If you add conventional air conditioning, you'll need to recalculate the energy load for the entire building." We spent the next hour going through the technical details. Harrison was bright and eager to learn, but he lacked the experience to understand how changing one element of a sustainable design could affect the entire system. As we worked, I realized how much institutional knowledge was walking out the door with my demotion. Friday morning brought an email that made my heart skip. Dr. Rodriguez wanted to schedule a follow-up call for 2 p.m. The subject line read, "Phoenix Green Housing Initiative, Next Steps." I tried not to read too much into the phrasing, but next steps sounded promising. The call lasted only 10 minutes, but they were the most important 10 minutes of my professional life. "Ms. Freeman, I'm pleased to inform you that the committee has selected your modular sustainable housing design as the winner of our competition. Your proposal scored highest in every category we evaluated: innovation, sustainability, cost-effectiveness, and community impact." I sat in stunned silence for a moment, then managed to say, "Thank you. I'm honored and excited to move forward." "The formal announcement will be made Monday morning at 10 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez continued. "We'll be holding a press conference at City Hall, and we'd like you to be present to answer questions about the design." After the call ended, I sat in my office, processing what had just happened. In the span of 1 week, I'd gone from being dismissed as irrelevant to winning the most significant housing competition in the city's history. My dated aesthetic had just been selected to house thousands of Phoenix residents in innovative, sustainable homes. I thought about calling Claire immediately but decided to wait until after the public announcement. There was something satisfying about keeping this victory private for a few more days, especially while Kenneth continued to restructure the innovation team around more contemporary approaches. Looking at my calendar, I realized that Monday's press conference would occur during the weekly staff meeting at Bright Hollow Labs. I wondered if anyone would be watching the local news. Monday morning arrived with unusual warmth for October in Phoenix. I'd spent the weekend preparing for the press conference, reviewing my design details and anticipating questions from reporters. The weight of the moment was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a professional victory, it was validation of everything I'd spent my career working toward. I arrived at City Hall 30 minutes early, wanting time to compose myself before facing the cameras. Dr. Rodriguez met me in her office, along with Mayor Patricia Thompson and several other city officials. "Ms. Freeman, before we begin, I want you to know how impressed we were with your presentation," Mayor Thompson said. "This housing initiative represents the future of sustainable urban development, and your design will serve as a model for other cities across the Southwest." The press conference was held in the main lobby of City Hall, with local television stations, newspaper reporters, and representatives from architectural publications in attendance. As I stood at the podium beside the mayor, I thought about all the late nights I'd spent working on this design in my home studio, never imagining it would lead to this moment. As the press conference concluded, I noticed several familiar faces in the crowd. Word had apparently spread quickly through Phoenix's architectural community. I saw colleagues from other firms, former clients, and even a few current Bright Hollow Labs employees who had obviously left work to attend. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Mom, I just saw the news online. I'm so proud of you." Her message was followed by a string of celebration emojis. The drive back to Bright Hollow Labs felt surreal. I'd just been announced as the winner of the city's most significant housing competition, but I still had to return to my desk in the restoration department and pretend this was just another Monday. As I walked through the office lobby, I could feel eyes following me. The news had clearly reached the firm. Janet, the receptionist, gave me a knowing smile and a thumbs up. Several junior architects stopped their conversations to congratulate me. I made it to my office without encountering Kenneth, but I knew that conversation was inevitable. By noon, it was clear that my dated aesthetic had just become the most talked about architectural design in Phoenix. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't finished yet. Kenneth appeared in my office doorway at 1 p.m., his expression a careful mask of professionalism that couldn't quite hide his frustration. "Eliza. Congratulations on your competition win," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied, not looking up from the historical preservation documents I was reviewing. "I'm pleased the city appreciated the design." "I'm curious," he continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. "When exactly did you develop this proposal? I don't recall seeing any modular housing concepts in your recent project portfolio." I set down my pen and met his gaze directly. "I worked on it during my personal time, using my home studio. The design process took about 6 months, primarily evenings and weekends." Kenneth's jaw tightened slightly. "I see. And you didn't think to discuss this with the firm? After all, Bright Hollow Labs has been your professional home for 25 years. The competition guidelines were clear that submissions could come from individual architects or firms," I said calmly. "I chose to submit as an individual." "But surely you understand the optics here," Kenneth pressed. "You're a Bright Hollow Labs employee winning a major city contract just days after being restructured within the firm. It could appear that we don't recognize our own talent." I almost laughed at his audacity. "The competition was announced 4 months ago, Kenneth. The submission deadline was 3 months ago. The judging process has been ongoing for weeks. None of this happened just days after anything." He stood up, his composure finally cracking. "The partners and I need to discuss how to handle this situation. The press is already calling for statements about our role in the project." "I'll save you the trouble," I said, returning to my documents. "I'll be handling all media inquiries personally." Wednesday brought the phone call I'd been expecting. It was Kenneth, his voice strained with forced enthusiasm. "Eliza, the partners have been discussing your recent success, and we'd like to propose a solution that benefits everyone. We're prepared to offer you reinstatement to the innovation team, as lead sustainable design architect. We'd also like to discuss how Bright Hollow Labs might serve as the implementing firm for your housing project." I let the silence stretch for several seconds before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Kenneth, but I'm quite content in my current role. As for the implementation, I'll be working directly with the city's selected construction partners." His sharp intake of breath was audible. "Eliza, surely you can see the mutual benefit here. The firm's resources, our established relationships with contractors." "The city has already selected their preferred partners," I interrupted gently. "The decision is final." On Thursday morning, I submitted my resignation letter to Bright Hollow Labs. After 25 years, it was time to start my own practice. The Phoenix housing project would be my first major client, but the phone hadn't stopped ringing since Monday's announcement. Architecture firms from across the country were calling, wanting to discuss partnerships or licensing agreements for my modular design concept. Kenneth made one final attempt to change my mind, appearing at my office as I packed my personal belongings. "This is a mistake, Eliza. You're throwing away decades of stability for what might be a short-term success." I looked around the office I was leaving behind, then at the man who had tried to make me feel obsolete. "Kenneth," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "you told me nobody wanted Grandma's designs anymore. It turns out you were wrong about what people actually want." And with that, I walked out of Bright Hollow Labs for the last time, not with a sense of loss, but with an overwhelming feeling of liberation. My journey from dismissed employee to independent architect had taught me that true innovation comes not from chasing trends, but from understanding timeless principles and applying them to contemporary challenges. The sweetest revenge isn't proving your critics wrong, it's proving that you were right all along.